So, New York State Attorney General Leticia James is seeking the testimony of Donald Trump, Don Jr., and Ivanka in her civil fraud investigation of the Trump Organization. And we just learned, courtesy of a court filing by Attorney General James, that when Eric Trump was subpoenaed and forced to testify in that same civil investigation, he invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. What are the legal consequences that flow from Eric pleading the Fifth? And what are his dad and his brother and his sister likely to do now? Let's talk about that. Because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So New York State Attorney General Leticia James is seeking testimony. She has subpoenaed Donald Trump, Don Jr., and Ivanka to testify in connection with her civil fraud investigation into the Trump Organization. Here is today's reporting from the New York Times. Headline: New York Attorney General outlines pattern of possible fraud at Trump business. And that article begins, the New York State Attorney General Leticia James accused Donald Trump's family business late Tuesday of repeatedly misrepresenting the value of its assets to bolster its bottom line, saying in court papers that the company had engaged in, quote, fraudulent or misleading, close quote, practices. And friends, here is what I think is the most interesting piece of the New York Times article. Quote, in early December, Ms. James issued a subpoena for Mr. Trump as well as for Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump, seeking to question them as part of her civil inquiry. Ms. James already questioned another of Mr. Trump's sons, Eric Trump, in October 2020. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination in response to more than 500 questions, the new court filing said. Eric pled the Fifth more than 500 times in one interview. I'm sorry, that's a whole lot of wrong. Now let's set aside the comedic value of one of Donald Trump's sons pleading the Fifth, because Donald Trump has famously said only mobsters plead the Fifth. And let's talk about the sort of legal consequences of what we just learned about Attorney General Tish James' investigation and about the fact that Eric Trump invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. First of all, the fact that Attorney General James has now subpoenaed the targets of the investigation, Donald Trump, Don Jr., and Ivanka, signals that she's at the very end of her civil fraud investigation. Why do I say that? Well, you don't sit down with the targets of the investigation until you already have all of the other evidence you can possibly collect up. All of the documents, written communications, all of the witness accounts from everybody else, because you want to use all of that information when you are finally sitting down and deposing Donald Trump, Don Jr., and Ivanka. So I think Tish James is at the very end stage of her civil fraud investigation into Trump and his organization. The other thing is that Eric has already pleaded his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and there is an easy out for Donald Trump, for Don Jr., and for Ivanka to avoid testifying. They can simply plead the Fifth too, because they undoubtedly have a right against self-incrimination. There is a parallel criminal investigation of Trump and company being conducted by the new Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg. He took over on January 1st for Cy Vance. And remember, Cy Vance already had his office indict the Trump Organization for fraud, Donald Trump's chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, for fraud, and that investigation is continuing. So Donald Trump, Don Jr., and Ivanka absolutely have a reason to invoke their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination in connection with Tish James subpoenas. And I predict they will likely do that, but they will fight tooth and nail to keep that day from ever coming. They'll probably file all kinds of bogus lawsuits trying to delay the inevitable. The other thing that we can glean from what has gone on here is that the civil case, the fraud case that Tish James looks like she's about to drop on Donald Trump and company will not end well for the Trumps. Why do I say that? Because we need to talk about the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination in the context of a criminal case, like the Manhattan DA is conducting, and then in the context of a civil investigation and ultimately a civil suit that will be brought by Tish James. In a criminal case, somebody gets to invoke their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and it absolutely cannot be used against that person. So if you're arrested and you invoke your Miranda rights, Miranda, which embodies your Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, that can never be held against you in court. Or in the grand jury, if you invoke your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination in the context of a criminal investigation, that can't be held against you, and it can't be held against you at trial. You can't be forced to incriminate yourself, and any invocation of your Fifth Amendment right can never be used against you in a criminal trial. But in a civil case, it can be. So if Donald Trump, Don Jr., Ivanka go the way of Eric and invoke their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, guess what? All of that can be packaged up and presented to the civil jury who will be handling the civil fraud case that undoubtedly will be brought against Trump and company. And evidence can be presented to that civil jury that all of these folks invoke their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and the judge will instruct that civil jury that you can draw negative inferences against them. You can find that they did wrong. You can use that as part of the evidence, and that can lead you to entering a verdict, entering a judgment against Trump and company for fraud. So the stakes are pretty high when it comes to somebody who decides to invoke their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination in a civil fraud investigation, the way Eric Trump just did, and I predict, if push comes to shove, the way Donald Trump, Don Jr., and Ivanka will when they are forced to sit at a deposition. So folks, I believe the investigative circle is tightening around Trump and company. I think that's true in the civil investigation in New York. I think that's true in the criminal investigation in New York. I think that's true in the Georgia State criminal investigation into Trump's election crimes. I think that's true with the Department of Justice upping the ante to seditious conspiracy charges against some of the defendants who attacked the Capitol. I think it's true with the House Select Committee issuing subpoenas now for guys like Giuliani and Sidney Powell and others. The investigative circle is tightening. And caught right in the middle is the hub of the conspiracy, Donald Trump. And for Donald Trump, justice is coming. And justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe, please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.